visually, great. As a game that would get people interested, I think it's great. I don't know if I would pay a full 60.
Yeah.
I could see myself paying 30 for it, like happily paying 30. But if I have, but the fact that it has rollback netcode automatically makes me want to buy this game. Period.
Yeah. At very minimum, right? As long as it's like 40 or $30, it's a good game to pick up. Just mess around with things.
I think
Um,
I think the directional, like the easy inputs, are actually like I enjoy all of it. Like this feels like a game that I could play as a daily driver and not actually worry too much about it. I feel like characters have a lot of like really scary shit that they can do, and I feel like there's a decent amount of depth in the game. Like for instance, have like knowing when you are willing to make the sacrifice for conversion, he's like by itself that mechanic alone is really interesting.
yeah.
Like
I feel like the perceived lack of depth in this game definitely has a lot more to do with its like how defensively favored it was, right? Like earlier we were experimenting with the block gauge, and it took a lot to put me into like into a guard break state, right? Otherwise, it's like I have no reason not to hold down back and wait for you to whip something or to just like be minus on block or something, right?
yeah, it feels like it's a hit throw kind of game.
Yeah,
But as someone who plays a lot of hit throw at characters, it doesn't bother me. It's like that's just how I already am gonna
yeah.
operate. So it doesn't
Like,
bother me that
yeah,
much. The block button thing is like slightly worrying in some regards, but like it's I mean, in some ways it's like I guess you're just picking on Oki, do you want to take cross up? Yes, no, hold button.
yeah,
Like
pretty much right.
but I feel like there's a good amount of high-low mix. I think that if they add more overheads, the game might get more interesting. The thing is like as soon as you add in a block button and you reduce the ability for cross-ups, you need to give more options for high-low mix-ups.
Yeah,
And but the problem is that if you do that in like if the speed at which all these overheads or these attacks come is too quick, it turns into playing Street Fighter 4 Elena, which is like mid-screen high lows and big conversions for a good amount of damage, and then it just feels, and the way that health comes back really quickly in this game, it kind of feels like the game might be playing against a watered down Elena.
yeah. There's also the issue with a lot of these special abilities are huge lockdown moves, right? Inquisitor, especially with the giant wheel, the walls from everybody else, like putting people into like a permanent block state for 10 seconds at a time feels kind of bad.
The time,
And
yeah, I agree with the amount of time feels bad, but if what they could do is reduce the amount of time and increase the amount of stun, or increase the amount of gray gauge that you get as a byproduct on block,
yeah,
and then it's fine. I
yeah,
understand why they would make it longer on hit if you're trying to set up something, but yeah, I feel like it's just a bit too long. But that's easy fixes, right?
yeah. Those are just like basically tuning things. But like definitely the biggest complaint I've heard in terms of the actual overall system is simply the lack of true high lows. A lot of the like any of the true overheads in this game only come out normals. It's all really slow. It's all really predictable, and because it's on rollback, the snappiness means that you can actually like respond to the high low mix up pretty much on reaction.
So I think that the other case study that I would look at then is Grand Blue Fantasy Versus, because that has nearly identical in terms of mechanics for this. Like when I saw all the familiar mechanics of this, I said this is just Grand Blue with rollback, and
Yep.
that's the game that I wanted for a while anyway. So
Yeah, we've been long missing Grand Blue. It feels like that was the demarcation between like two different generations of fighting games now, right? The Grand Blue release and the start of like the rollback era.
yeah, I think the thing is that with that game, the only thing that's rough about that case study is that Arcs has kept nerfing characters. Like
Oof.
instead of the power level going up and just kind of increasing in the amount of dumb shit, anything that seemed like it would be too far, they I mean, overall, that like that's part of why the Japanese scene kind of stopped
Died
playing the
off.
game as much,
Yeah.
because they reduced power levels so much. So I think they might learn from that lesson, and they might just try to increase power levels in this game, in my opinion.
Well, in Grand Blue's case, was Arxis in charge of the nerfs and buffs? Because I know, for example, with Dragon Ball Fighter Z, it was actually Bandai Namco calling the shots on that.
Really? Okay,
Yeah,
then I didn't know. I
yeah,
just know that the nerf, like, I mean, I can't imagine. See, okay, this is where I'm like, I don't know, because on some level, it's like, why would you let the IP holder does not care about anything other than selling units and brand perception.
right.
So if I'm letting them just make the game, I would just trust the game developers to balance their own game. But why would that feels weird why Bandai Namco would step in and say something.
Well, let me see. Because it's not as if Arxis was the sole developer on it, right? It was pretty much a joint effort between them and Bandai Namco. I'm not sure who else was in charge of the Grand Blue side, but at least it makes sense with Bandai Namco, given that they do have a fighting game staff. So if
Yeah.
Arxis was basically just in charge of developing the overall engine and looks and everything, and then they hand off to the main staff for like daily maintenance or like internal maintenance, for instance, that probably
Yeah.
makes a lot more sense on their side business wise. Otherwise, Arxis would have need to have like a dedicated team for DBFC, which doesn't make sense for them.
Yeah, I can see that. I
And
can
let me
definitely
see,
see
I
that.
can probably look that up on For Example, but my basic hypothesis is that the differences and their philosophy behind balance is going to show who's actually in charge, right? Like from what we've seen with GGST so far, they've actually been pretty light on the handle in terms of nerfs. But anybody that wants, pretty much anybody that gets a buff gets a pretty significant buff.
Hmm. I'm very curious where this game goes.
Yeah, I
The
think
the
it's
big
just,
thing for me is that if it has crossplay with console, like if you
oh, it
have
has to, right? Because it's only coming out three platforms in the first place: PS4, PS5, and PC, and that's
PC.
basically only like one and a half platforms.
Yeah, but it was also the same thing with Strive on PC, and we don't have crossplay.
Was Strive only on PS? Let's see. Guilty Gear Strive release platforms. Let me see. Platforms. Yeah, you're right. Interesting.
Not
But
only
then,
that, they would be having somebody else who's the IP holder. They would have to be willing to pay extra money for crossplay, because the thing is that I think with every for in order for you to have crossplay with PlayStation, there's an additional payment I think you need to make to Sony. I think that's one of the
right?
things that came out during the Fortnite lawsuits.
Yeah. So crossplay does exist for GGST. It just took a while to come out. Apparently, according to VG 24/7 at least, it was just a verification process on their end. And to be fair, like I worked on the QA side of game dev before. There is a very significant like and lengthy verification process for any sort of like release, right? And
I believe it.
that would probably be extra for just like crossplay connectivity.
I just think from the business side, it's like I think unless the community really yells for something, I think it's not going to happen. But even then, there's still politics from the actual
Yeah, especially with
business
Sony we're
side of
talking
stuff.
about.
Well, I mean, even another example is like Monster Hunter. As historically, as soon as it went multi-platform outside of Nintendo, there's no cross saves. Just
Yeah.
doesn't exist.
Well, to be fair, that's also Nintendo, and who the hell knows what Nintendo's thinking? They're at least 15 years behind everybody else in terms of like philosophy of multiplayer.
It's true, but it's the same. I think that statement is also made of Sony too, right? Like remember
Mm,
when Fortnite was the big thing, and they
right.
made that big push for like cross-platform uniformity, and it was like PlayStation that was the last one that was holding out.
Yeah, but at least with PlayStation's case, I think it's less about like out of date philosophy guiding their policy, and more just that they are at the time of the Fortnite lawsuit, they were the clear winners of that generation's console wars. and they had no reason to actually cooperate with anybody else without like a hefty like bag included. I think they just felt like, I think just they felt like it felt probably from the PlayStation perspective that they had more to lose than to gain by through crossplay,
Yeah,
because of so much of their guiding philosophy in the first place was exclusives, was keeping everything on the PlayStation platform. If you want to be involved in all the stuff that everybody, that tens of millions of people are playing, you need to be on the Sony platform. And
agreed.
crossplay felt like it was giving everybody else a buff at their detriment,
Agreed.
which is
I
not
can
applicable
understand
to
that
Nintendo.
aspect.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's less of the case now. Microsoft has made a lot of inroads in overall gaming,
I think
and
at this point though, it's like Sony has so much brand value they could do whatever they want.
yeah,
It's just all about maintaining it because the perceived value because of the lack of consoles that are available. Like I can't remember. Like I gotta find the latest sales numbers for PS5s, but it seems absolutely ridiculous.
yeah, and like I would bet a decent amount of money that the only reason why the Nintendo Switch has beaten the PS5 in sales on a month to month basis is one part the shortage of high quality components from TSMC for to supply the PS5, and another part because Nintendo Switch is based on Prime architecture, they don't need particularly advanced chip manufacturers to keep the production side going.
I could see that.
So it's like it's literally just a supply constraint keeping people from keeping Sony from winning the monthly records again. It's not, that's not to say that Nintendo Switch is any less popular, but it's very much bolstered by the fact that it's not dependent on on equally sensitive supply lines,
Sure.
and the demand for the overall market is such that people will literally buy anything that's on shelves right now, and the shelves will pretty much empty out in minutes.